Margaret Lewin, and welcome to Margaret Lewin Quilting. Today is the very first day of Moda Fabrics Stitch Pink 2020 Quilt Along, and I am so excited to bring you the very first block. Here you can see block 1 done in the pink fabrics that Moda has suggested, and this block is also block number 1, but this is done in the fabrics that I've picked out to represent melanoma. I was recently asked to show everybody exactly how I go about organizing my fabrics for Stitch Pink because I have so many to organize and to keep track of. So first, before I get into showing you how I made the block, I'm going to show you how I went about organizing for the stitch along. So stay tuned and I'll show you how I organized for it, then I'll show you exactly how I made my block. I have been asked to show exactly how I'm organizing my fabrics for Stitch Pink, and this is how I'm doing it. Yesterday I posted a video in regards to how I'm labeling my fabrics. I'll put a link to it up in the description box so that you can see it. And this is how I'm organizing it by pattern. So what I'm doing in each one of the Stitch Pink blocks, it comes with about 2 pages of instructions on how to put it together. So you can see here we've got A through F. What I've done is I've copied the corresponding numbers for the pink quilts directly under the A through F. It's working out perfectly for me because if I want to know exactly what color I used, I just have to look at this number. Then I turn around and I grab my fabrics, and there's my number 64, and this is where I used it, and this is where I used it. Works perfect. And then what I've done to go ahead and keep track of what colors I'm using with my black Stitch Pink is on this side I'm writing the numbers so you can see my 101, which is our background fabric, here is listed. Then we've got 64 listed for B, so I know that that is my Duchess pink, which is this very, very beautiful soft pink. And for this fabric it's number 418. So I can just go over to my pile of fabrics, find my 418, and I'm off and ready to go if I'd like to make it later on. That is exactly how I'm keeping myself organized for Stitch Pink. Now it's time to get on with the video showing you how I put together block 1. All right, here is our block number 1 of our Stitch Pink. So you can see here I've got one of the blocks done for Moda's Stitch Pink. I made this one up earlier today, and now I'm going to make it in a second colorway. What I wanted to do is, I'm going to set this one aside right over here so you can still see it. I really wanted to make this in black and gray. The reason for that is my son-in-law has melanoma, and I wanted to make this quilt in honor of him. I know October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, but there was something really special to me. So I grabbed a whole bunch of different blacks and grays from Moda, and I'm going to go ahead and make my blocks for my quilt, the one I'll give to John, in black and gray. So here are all of my pieces all cut out, and I'm going to go through cutting them with you, and then I'll go through putting this block together. It's a real nice, easy block, nothing difficult at all. So the first thing that you do is you cut out your fabrics. Now within the directions they tell you to cut and then subcut right away. I didn't do that just so that I could show you a couple different hints on camera. I did, however, go ahead and on the 2.5-inch squares, I did draw my diagonal line for stitching on at a later point, just because I wanted to get that done while I had it. So this is what we've got. This is our absolute center block on this one. So I'm going to set that one aside. And this is actually the very first thing that we're going to be working with. So I'm going to take my 4 blocks that are made out of Grunge's white paper. I love this fabric. This fabric goes with, I would say, everything and anything. I just love, excuse my reach, I just love the way it looks. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 2.5 inch square and I'm going to set it across my blocks in a corner. I've got my right sides together and I'm just going to set it here. And I'm actually, it doesn't matter what corner you put it in, I'm just going to do it up this way because it makes it just a little bit easier to understand what we're sewing. And what we're going to do is sew on the drawn line. You don't want to be sewing 1/4 inch from this one. You want to be right on the drawn line. So I am going to pin it, and then I'm going to take it right over to my sewing machine, and I'm going to continuously sew each one of these down, and then I'll come on back and show you what our next step is. Now don't forget, we're going to be sewing right on that line. So I'll be right back to show you the next step. I have stitched. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a ruler. There are 2 rulers that I have been using consistently making this block. The first one is my 5.5 inch Creative Grids ruler, and the second one is my 8.5 inch square Creative Grids ruler. So I'm going to start with my 5.5 inch one. I'm going to lay this down and I'm going to line up my 1/4 inch mark, and let me bring it up and show it to you. Right here, I think you can see, right here is my 1/4 inch mark. I'm going to lay that mark on my stitching line. My stitching line is actually 1 thread in from the drawn line. So I didn't stitch right on the line, I stitched right next to it. The reason for that is because this is called the flip and fold method. So I stitched it, and now what I'm going to do is trim it away, and then I'm going to flip it and press it. And I find for me, when I'm sewing, that comes out the best. So I'm going to line up my 1/4 inch. I'm going to take my rotary blade and I am going to trim. Alright, I'll set these in 2 piles so that we've got them, and I can very easily and quickly throw them away, these pieces, or you could save them and use them for another quilt, but they're pretty tiny for me. I'm not going to mess with saving those. I'm just going to set those aside and move on. Once I've trimmed all these, the second stage that I'm going to do, or the next step that I'm going to do with these, is I'm going to take them over to my ironing board. I'm going to set my seams, then I am going to turn them over, and I'm going to press my seams open. I like doing that, and I seem to have great success with it. So that's how I'll be handling this one. I'll be right back to show you. My seams are all pressed open, and I wanted to show you what I use to help me get nice flat seams. This is called a strip stick, and it's something that I have used forever. And what it is it's a piece of wood on the inside, and it's covered with, I believe, a batting, and then there's just a simple piece of cotton over it so that you can sew, or so that you can press on it. It works really great, and it is something that I use all the time. This is available on my website. If I can find a link on the internet for it, I'll also put a link below. So let's move on to our next step. So I would, when you're doing these, once you've pressed and flipped them and then pressed them again, I would take a minute to square them up. Make sure that they're good and square. They should be 4.5 inches. So now I'm going to set these 4 aside, and I'm going to move on to our very next step per our directions. The next thing we're going to be making is this part of our block. So we're going to be making these. From these, we're going to have 2 squares that are, I believe these are 5.5 inches square. These are of the same colorway, and I'm calling this my medium gray. And then I've got a white and a light gray. These two I'm going to stack together. I'm going to cut these two at a time. If you're comfortable with your cutting, go ahead and cut two at a time. If you're not comfortable with your cutting, only cut one at a time. You're better off taking a little bit more time in preparing for the block than you are having to redo it. I'm done with this ruler for now, so I'm going to set it aside, and I'm going to grab my 8.5 inch ruler. For this block, what we need to do is we need to cut it twice diagonally. So I'm going to take my Creative's Grids ruler. Now this is my 8.5 inch square one, and I'm going to be using this great line that goes right down through the center of it, because that's going to tell me that I've got the true center of my square. I'm going to take this and I'm going to line it right up against the fabric here. Make sure that I can see the fabric. I'm going to double check with my eyes my corners of my block here and here. Once I think I'm good and square, I'm going to just put my hand down on my ruler, grab my rotary cutter, and I'm going to cut once. I'm going to carefully lift this ruler up because I really don't want to move any of those pieces. And I'm going to switch it over to this side, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to line that ruler up with the fabric, right on the edge of the fabric, and then I'm going to take my rotary cutter and I'm going to cut it again. I'm going to do the exact same thing with these two blocks, so let me set these aside. And I will grab these two. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. The first thing I'm going to do is make sure that they're lined up together. Then I'm going to take my ruler, I'm going to lay it down, lining up the edge of it, making certain that I am square. Then I'm going to turn it like this, and I'm going to do that again. And then I'm going to lay the blocks out because I'm going to piece them together in groups of 2, which will make it so faster and much quicker. I'll be done before you know it. Here's 1, there's 2. I'm going to line up the next one. 1, 2. And what I'm using to determine where these go is the picture on the directions that Moda gave us. Okay, so there's the start of my 4 blocks. Now I'm going to stick in my triangles. So here's 1. Isn't that block going to be pretty? At least I think it is going to be. I love the way this quilt looks. Ironically enough, when I decided that I really wanted to do this quilt for John, I started looking for fabrics, and I was finding the blacks, the dark grays, blacks, and all those colors. And the more I looked, I really wanted to include a second color. So I did a little bit more research, and I found out that brain cancer color is gray or silver. Well, John's melanoma has gone to his brain, so I thought it's a perfect reason to make it black and gray. So here's my blocks. Here's how I'm going to put them together. I'm going to sew these 2 and these 2. Once I've got those sewn, then I will press them, then I will put them together. One thing I do want to caution you though is try really hard when you put this through your sewing machine not to start with the tip of your fabric. Start on the straight. It will just go through so much easier. So I'm going to put these together and then I'll be back to show you the next step. Here are all of my blocks. You can see again I've pressed them open. I'll put a link up above to a video where I showed you how I use my strip stick and really the reason why I use it. And this is what your block is going to look like. So here are my blocks. Once I've done this, my next step is going to be to take these blocks and to sew it together this way. Once I've done that, I will again set my seams, press my blocks, and then I will come over and I will show you how it looks, and I'll lay out how we're going to go about putting our block together, because quite honestly, we're ready to put our 3 rows together as soon as we finish this. So I'll be right back. I brought the camera in closer on purpose. I want you to see how I go about squaring these up. These are supposed to square to 4.5 inches. Therefore, the center right here should be at 2 1/4. So I'm going to take my ruler, and right here is my 2 1/4 mark. I'm going to use this line to guide me through trimming. So I'm going to stick the point, which is right here, of the 2 1/4 inch mark, and then I'm just going to rotate my ruler until that solid line goes all the way across. I'm going to hold it in place. I'm going to trim the right side and then across the top. I'm going to just clear up these little scraps. Then I'm going to rotate it. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. Only this time, I'm not only going to put my 2 1/4 mark there, I'm going to make sure that I'm 4.5 inches down here and 4.5 inches up there. So I'm just going to rotate it till I get it where it needs to be. Oops, I moved it just a little bit. I'm going to hold it down again and then just trim it. I'm going to trim my other 3 off camera, and then I'll come back and show you how we're going to put this block together. There is my 4.5 inch block. I'll be right back. All right, I've trimmed up all my blocks, so I'm going to set these rulers aside. And what I'm clean my mat off a little bit. I'm going to grab my wool mat. This is something that I use constantly. It's a fantastic wool mat, and I have one of the largest sizes that they sell. One of the reasons why I have it is because it's great to lay blocks out on, for me to take from my cutting table to my sewing table, from my sewing table to my ironing board. Wherever it is I have to travel with them, I tend to not lose a piece when I do that. So I'm going to grab all my blocks and let's get this laid out so that you can see what it's going to look like. So I'm going to start by putting my 4 corners in, or down. Then I'm going to work at my center, and now let's work our way around. When you lay your quilt block out, make sure that your white is placed towards the outside so that your star really pops, and it will bring more focus into here. You want this light gray next to the black. So I'm just going to keep doing it. There we go. This is what the block is going to look like. So now I'm going to go put it together. What I will do is sew these, and these. Then I will stop and add the 3rd block onto my rows. I will then take it over to the ironing board and press it. Once I've pressed it, then I will put the 3 rows together. I'll be back in just a second to show you what this block looks like all done. Here are my 2 completed blocks. So I'm very happy with the way both of them turned out. I'm really happy with the way that both of them turned out. I think they look great. I am especially happy with the colors that I picked out for the black and gray one. I think this really dark center just kind of makes it pop a little bit. So these are the 2 blocks that I'm doing for the first block. So don't forget, I'm making an entire quilt out of blacks and grays, and I'm doing this other quilt out of what Moda has picked out for their Stitch Pink for breast cancer awareness. So what I'm doing is one for breast cancer awareness and a secondary one for melanoma. To make this quilt, a couple things that I did use is I did use my Olfa. I also used my strip stick, and these little blue scissors of Karen K. Buckley's are my absolute positive favorite scissors. They sit next to my sewing machine, and they are great for snipping little threads. The 2 rulers that I used once I had made my cuts from my big fabric are my 5.5-inch square and my 8.5-inch square. The quilt block does measure 12.5 inches square when you get done with it to this point. So make sure that your block does measure 12.5 inches. If it doesn't, come on back next time, which will be tomorrow, and I will show you a little trick of what you can do if in fact your quilt block does not measure what it needs to. So come on back tomorrow and I will see you here again at Margaret Lewin Quilting for our Stitch Pink sponsored by Moda Fabrics. I'll put a link below to Moda's website so you can go out and pick up the pattern for yourself. Otherwise, I'll see you here again tomorrow for block number 2. Thank you so much for joining me. Do not forget to post your quilt block and make sure that you use the hashtag Moda Stitch Pink. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.